It's been a great journey. It's been a fun experience learning all these skills and learning more life lessons than just the basic skills of how to operate these machines. Just critical thinking, how to think for yourself, how to think independently, how to quantify that and apply it at a constant rate to whatever you're doing in this entire world. Um, and from there, you just realize that you can do anything. That's the most important takeaway, is that you can truly do anything.
Hey, welcome back. I'm Chris Chase with the Western Flyer Foundation. In this episode, we're going to take a short little trip out of Port Townsend, only about 4 or 5 miles, but we're headed to the Port Townsend Foundry. The Port Townsend Foundry, it's a casting foundry, a bronze foundry, was started in 1981 by Pete Langley. And the reason I needed to go out to the foundry in the first place was in 1937, when the Western Flyer was built, they used galvanized steel portholes down the side of the house. They used bronze across the front, but there were 11 galvanized steel portholes installed on the side of the house. And though the steel is in incredibly good condition for 82 years old, it's the mechanism, it's that hinge and this dog that won't even move at all, that really needed a lot of attention. So we weighed the pros and cons like you do in all your boat projects, you know. Spend the time and the effort to try to fix up these portholes. A lot of the glass was broken. Again, those hinges were almost all seized up, or have new ones cast in silicon bronze. So we opted for the new bronze ones, at least down the side of the boat. So I started going out to the foundry 3 or 4 weeks ago and kind of going through all the steps, the patterning, the casting in the sand, the pouring of the molten metal was incredible. The tumbling, the grinding, and final the machine shop that's kind of putting all the final edges on the porthole, all those mechanisms that make them work really good. It is amazing how much energy and passion is put into creating all these beautiful bronze objects that we put on wood boats. And I got to say also, I got to interview Pete Langley. I've known Pete for over 30 years. And when you get to sit down with somebody, you get to talk to them for a few hours, you really dive into their world, you get to understand a lot more about them. And Pete is all about the working waterfront. And I can say he really practices what he preaches. His crew is mainly built up of young people in kind of that apprenticeship program that we're all, kind of familiar with from the early 20th century, late 19th century, where you come up through the ranks, you start sweeping the floor and you work your way up to the machine shop. But it was incredible to get to know Pete Langley. Anyway, I'll stop talking. Let's dive into the video.
It's like looking at something that you want to make, or you don't have it made yet, but you can see it. A lot of people can only see the outside shape. Well, a lot of times I can see the internals without even having to think about it. It's like looking at a Coke bottle. I can see the shape of the Coke even if the bottle wasn't there. So it's how you take all of those little genetic traits, and next thing you know, here you are 40 years later. Well, part of it started, my mom knew I had a tendency to like playing with fire. Having lit many of them both in the house as a young child and on the boats and at the beaches, but I also was good at playing with sand. And so a lot of the older brothers and sisters all were doing yacht maintenance or boat repair, that kind of stuff. And I had a tendency to really like metals, and she noticed that, but she would take me to a lot of different plants. I think the first couple of different foundry, the Mort's foundry in Costa Mesa, was in when I was 12, looking at that and building other parts, and of course helping them at the time. They were building a little pinky schooner right under the bow of Spike, Africa, where it was being built in Costa Mesa. So riveting on the gaff jaws and doing all that stuff, I kind of had a knack for the ball peen hammer and making things work. I was actually born in Cave Junction, Oregon, but my dad retired from logging and bought the Catalyst in late 1959, moved it to Coos Bay by 1960, and then by 1962 he fully retired from logging and moved all of us on board, 7 kids and my parents, and we went through a lot of sea trials going across the Coos Bay Bar, back and forth, and the final last trip back was anchoring up inside the Coos Bay Bar, and then Dad said, everybody strip down and swim to the beach. And literally all 9 of us in the water. I can remember shivering on my dad's back, hanging with our clothes in a plastic bag, so when we got to the beach, we could put them back on. Yeah, so we left Coos Bay on the ironic time, just early October 1962. So we had the pleasure of riding out the Columbus Day storm, which was October 12th, 1962. I'll never forget, about 90 miles off Cape Mendocino. And so, yeah, it was a hair-raising ride and kind of a very memorable thing. But being on a boat that rolls to 60 degrees on every we took on a lot of water, took on a lot of experience, but we were then able to get into port later on, about 7 days later after steering cable break and all that good stuff, and eventually ended up in Morro Bay. Well, I started doing foundry work in high school, and luckily my shop teacher noticed that I had a knack. High school had a foundry, full machine shop, full welding thing, so it was probably what you'd call an old school style high school compared to today, which is one of the things we're lacking in our trades these days, is the fact that industrial arts are not being taught the way they were. One of the things I do is start some of the younger ones that, basically have no skill or no understanding of the process. I give them a great title like industrial hygienist. They get a broom and a dustpan, and they get to go help facilitate the other people's workspace by making it clean, and they get to then observe what the other people are doing. So they watch that, they clean up, they make things are done, and I can assign tasks for that throughout the building that allow them to then move through those sectors, taking and clean up. But after they're done cleaning, they start to then realize, oh, this is a machine, right? Each person was doing something that was very important to the next guy. So the pattern maker starting out with a napkin sketch or a 3D CAD drawing, whatever it is, has to go up there and build something and calibrate it for all the shrink rates and all the good things that go on in the pattern making world. But then it's got to get to the molder, and he's got to understand what the pattern maker made and how to manipulate those tools, whether it's core boxes or just a standard mold or whatever comes off. But that sequence then goes into a molder, then having to understand how the sand is prepped, whether it's too wet or too dry or doesn't have enough clay in it. All of those factors come into play. But then he also has to engineer how the metal is fed in that mold, and then the gating and risering. If the pattern maker hadn't already put it on the match plate, they're being taught how to do that on the fly. And that's what's made a lot of the skill sets here we were able to show them how to do that without having all the production stuff be done for them. They're learning what the other people would be doing if they were doing a full, say, 100,000 run of parts. All that tooling would be fixed. Well, if we're only going to make 2, I don't need to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars there. I'll spend it on the labor to do it in the sand.
How I'd put it is just the amount of trust that he gives all his employees. It's incredible. He hands you something and he wants you to think for yourself and go, I think I know how to do this. And then he just leaves you be to think about how you want to go about it and create your own art with it. You're doing it in a standard sort of way, but you have to follow the steps in your own head to get to the point that he wants you to get to.
Turns out that any portable business within the city limits didn't require a city business license at the time. So blacksmiths or a regular furrier or anything on a trailer didn't need a city business license, just a state license. So I went ahead and got a state license and bought a flatbed trailer that was 8 by 22 and put the propane tank and the furnace on it. And I started the foundry right on the trailer, and I was portable. And I worked for 4 years in the street on Jackson Street before the city was willing to say, if you go to the port and lease some property down there, we'll let you occupy the space. So it's kind of how we started, and then eventually got a lease with the port, and we ended up building a building down there and started making parts. So then you go from the molding, you get into the pouring and the metallurgy, and each one of those, every alloy pours at different temperatures, they solidify different, they do all of that. Well, the yellow metals are typically what you would say yellow brass or manganese bronze in there, but no, we do mostly silicon bronze, aluminum nickel bronze. Now, all of those have 31 flavors, so to speak, of each one. There's 7 different alloys of silicon bronze, 5 different alloys of aluminum bronze. There's 4 different alloys of manganese bronze. It goes on from tin bronzes to leaded tin bronzes to red brass to yellow brasses. So each one has an SAE spec and stuff that you go to. And I kind of I lend more to the high-end alloys because they perform and do what you want. We range anywhere from some of our aluminum stuff at around 1350 all the way up to some of the bronzes in the aluminum nickel stuff as high as 2250 typically in the Fahrenheit. And the propane furnace that we use basically is 145,000 BTUs per hour, and it's all about how you contain that heat into the refractory in the furnace so that the radiant heat is then transferring to the alloy, which has been a really good system. There's a lot of, I basically put together the unit and the furnace and have been using it for years. It's just very efficient and does the right thing. So. Well, I certainly hope we've played our part. I know my parents would be proud. They were extremely influential as mentors, both Dad, Mom, Van, all of the other siblings in there to be able to pull this off. It hasn't been easy, so it's been great that, of course, Van being the character he was always, what would you say? That Huck Finn kind of guy. You want to come help paint, kid? Great, grab a brush, So he wasn't shy about letting people experience, the good, the wrong, the bad, and say, well, what'd you learn today? Those kind of things. It's really important, and it's been fun to see it come to the point that now you can help other people throughout the industry.
Yeah, moving through all the departments as I did through the molding, grinding, and now machining, you learn so much from each step, and not just about what you're working on. It's kind of a life lesson as you go along. And for me, getting all the way into the machine shop, I finally realized, because everything's so precise, there's no variables or errors that come from the machines themselves. You get to the point where you're like, I'm the only one who's causing problems here. I need to make sure that I'm as precise as these machines.
very first castings from Port Townsend Foundry that I started are on the schooner Rosa Sharon. And it was kind of ironic of several years ago when schooner Martha made her Transpac debut. She went to South, and I was able to go down to both San Francisco and then eventually San Diego and race with her, where I got to race on Martha with hardware I put on that very day before the race against hardware I'd made for the Rosa Sharon racing in the same race, along with Fame and Curlew. All of those had various different parts and stuff that I had made over this sequence of years coming up to that point, which was almost 35 years.
Starting with this guy, the outer ring, we chucked it up from the inside first before this was machined, and then dialed in the entire outside surfaces, getting the 100% cleanup and getting this down to the machine level that we needed. And then you flip it around, register it on the jaws on the outside, get the outside surface cleaned up, and then this inside here, and also this inner gasket. And then lay out the holes and drill and countersink them. Definitely, each one comes in steps. You want to do them in the right order so that the preceding part that follows is machined next. For example, we did this outer frame first just to make sure that the alignment would work with the holes getting drilled through these tangs to fit onto this guy. And the same with this one. We did the threading, all the cleanup on this one first, so that way we could thread these glass retaining rings to fit. Yes, that's the most technical, because it has to be perfect. It has to go down nice and smooth and hold the glass down. So that's definitely the most time-consuming part. Everything else is relatively simple machining, just facing and boring.
At some point going to have to retire in some form or fashion. I'd like to do some of my boat projects on the side and a few other things like that. Go enjoy the fact that there's boats around the world I can go sail on, and or help sail training, some of the youth involvement there, but really hoping that we can find a crew of people that would either like to take the business on or make a co-op out of it, wherever it needs to do to continue on. Given that, the foundry started originally in 1883, it can now be considered a true legacy industry for Jefferson County. So if they can keep it up and hopefully move it into the next level, right now we're kind of bursting already at the seams again. We've got to figure out the next move, and that'll take a team, because it's not a one-guy affair anymore. It takes the teamwork to get there, but I think that'll happen. I'm pretty positive that somewhere along the line somebody's going to see value in what we do and how we approach it.
Hey, that's it. The end of another chapter in the rebuilding of the Western Flyer. Sure hope you enjoyed this one. It was, again, great to interview Pete Langley and his crew. I love getting to know people, kind of diving a little bit deeper into their world. And I encourage you, if you need marine hardware, you got a buddy or a friend that's outfitting a boat, definitely reach out to the Port Townsend Foundry. You will not be disappointed in the product you get. And I will definitely put links in the description box to contact info, social media for those guys, so it'll be easy to find them. But anyway, next episode we will be back to the boat. They're starting to work on those main deck hatches, so the next episode, back to woodworking. But anyway, tell that episode, tell that chapter. Thanks for watching.
if sea level rise comes, the old adage is, high tide rises all boats. Means we're going to need more boats. So I think we're in a good position.